This occurred roughly 3 years ago. I was residing in another city, in one of those older 3-story apartment complexes with beige hallway carpets and a persistent, faint odor of aged cooking. My apartment was 2B. I was 28, working a dead-end data entry job, and essentially without family. So, when Thanksgiving arrived, my strategy was straightforward: order a pizza, watch football, and act as if it were any other Thursday. The week prior, I encountered Mrs. Petrov from 3B, directly above me, in the mail room. She was a sweet elderly woman, likely in her late 70s, always in a knitted shawl, and her apartment perpetually smelled of cooking cabbage. She smiled, her eyes crinkling. "You are all alone here, young man," she said in her slightly shaky voice. I admitted I had no family in the city and wasn't going anywhere. "Nonsense," she declared, patting my arm. "You come to 3B, 7 o'clock, Thanksgiving. I make a small turkey. It is not good to be alone on a holiday." Honestly, I didn't want to go, it felt awkward, but guilt made me agree. 7 o'clock, Mrs. Petrov. I'll bring some soda. Thanksgiving Day was cold and gray. I spent most of it in my boxers watching television. Around 6:30, I showered, put on a decent sweater and jeans, and grabbed a $10 bottle of red soda. At precisely 7 p.m. I walked up to the 3rd floor. The hallway was quiet. I knocked on 3B. "Mrs. Petrov, it's Mark from downstairs." There was no answer. I knocked again, more firmly. "Hello?" Still nothing. Leaning in, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. "Mrs. Petrov?" I called, pushing it open slowly. "Are you okay?" I stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the smell, not cabbage, but the delicious aroma of roasted turkey and herbs, with a sharp, underlying scent of bleach. The apartment was dark except for the dining room. I walked in and my jaw dropped. The table was set perfectly for 2. A small, golden-brown turkey sat on a platter in the center, surrounded by mashed potatoes, green beans, 2 glasses, and folded napkins. It looked like a magazine picture, but Mrs. Petrov was absent. "Hello," I said, my voice too loud in the silence. I took a few more steps into the apartment. "Mrs. Petrov?" Then I heard it, a faint dripping sound from the short hallway leading to her bedroom. A weird, cold feeling washed over me. This was wrong. My plan to leave and return to my pizza became overwhelmingly appealing. I turned to go, and a man stepped out of the bedroom hallway. He was tall, much taller than me, dressed in a plain black ski mask, a dark hoodie, and jeans. In his right hand, he held a large kitchen knife, covered in blood, the source of the dripping. We stared at each other for what felt like a full minute. My brain couldn't process the scene, the perfect table, the smell of turkey, and this man. I didn't scream or speak, I just dropped the soda bottle. It shattered, spraying red soda and glass across the floor. The sound broke the spell. I turned and ran for the door. I was fast, but he was faster. I fumbled with the doorknob, my hands shaking, and he was on me. He grabbed the back of my sweater, pulling me off my feet. I slammed against the wall, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. I tried to fight, to kick, but he was far stronger. He wrapped an arm around my neck from behind and started dragging me back inside. I was choking, clawing at his arm, but it was like iron. He dragged me past the perfect dinner table and threw me onto the hallway floor. I landed on my stomach, scrambling to turn over, gasping for air. He stood over me, pointing the knife. "Quiet," he said, his voice low and muffled by the mask. He gestured with the knife toward the bedroom. "Look." I looked and saw her. Mrs. Petrov was lying on the floor just inside her bedroom, her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Her knitted shawl was soaked. There was blood, so much blood. I think I made a sound, I felt sick. The tall man looked at me, then at the knife in his hand. He knelt. I was frozen, unable to move. He grabbed the front of my sweater with his free hand and slowly started wiping the bloody knife on my chest, back and forth. The blood was warm, smearing all over the wool. "No, please," I hissed. "What are you doing?" He said nothing, just finished cleaning the blade on me. Then he grabbed my right hand and forced my fingers to wrap around the knife's handle. He pushed my hand, still holding the knife, down onto the carpet. "Why?" I stammered, tears streaming down my face. He just looked at me for a second. Then he stood, raised his booted foot, and kicked me square in the side of the head. The world exploded in white-hot pain, and then there was nothing. I woke to someone shouting, on the ground. "Show me your hands now." My head felt split in two, the room was spinning, and I tasted blood. I blinked, trying to focus. A police officer stood with his gun drawn, pointed right at me. I looked down, I was on my hands and knees. The bloody kitchen knife was on the floor directly under my right hand, as if I'd just dropped it. My sweater was drenched. "What?" he tried to, I began. "Get on your stomach. Hands behind your back." I was utterly confused. The man in the mask. Where did he go? There was a man, I choked out as the officer cuffed me, the plastic biting into my wrists. A tall man in a mask. "Yeah, save it for the judge, buddy," the cop said, hauling me to my feet. They dragged me out. I saw the perfect table, the uneaten turkey, the shattered soda bottle. I saw Mrs. Petrov's feet down the hall. And I saw my other neighbors peeking from their doors, their faces a mix of horror and morbid curiosity as they watched me, the guy from 2B, get hauled away in handcuffs on Thanksgiving, covered in blood. The next few days were the worst nightmare of my life. I was in a holding cell, interrogated for hours. I told them my story, the tall man, the mask, the dinner. They didn't believe a word. "So, let me get this straight," a detective said. "This tall man killed her, set a lovely dinner, invited you up, and then framed you? All in the span of what, 30 minutes? It sounded insane. I sounded insane. The DA charged me with first-degree murder. The evidence was overwhelming, my fingerprints were on the door, my sweater was covered in her blood, my hand had been on the knife. I was going to prison for life. I sat in my cell, numb. Then, 4 days later, the same detective came to my cell. He looked tired and angry. "Well," he grumbled, unlocking the door, "it's your lucky day." It turned out the tall man was real. He was Mrs. Petrov's nephew. He had come over around 5 p.m. demanding money for his drug debts. She refused, they argued, and he snapped, killing her. Panicked, he spent over an hour in her apartment trying to devise a plan when he heard me knock. He saw me through the peephole, the neighbor, the perfect patsy. He hid, let me walk in, let me see the table she had set before he'd even arrived. He attacked me, wiped the knife on me, knocked me out, and placed the weapon in my hand. Then he walked out, used the back stairs, and called 911 from a pay phone a block away, reporting a man screaming in sounds of a struggle in 3B. He had set me up perfectly. The only reason they caught him was his own stupidity. He used Mrs. Petrov's credit card at a liquor store 2 hours later. That, plus the building's grainy lobby camera showing him entering at 5:05 p.m. and leaving at 7:15 p.m., about 10 minutes after he knocked me out, was enough. They released me just like that. "Sorry for the mix-up," the detective said. "I never went back to apartment 2B. I just got on a bus and moved. I couldn't stay in that building. They caught the nephew, and I heard he's in prison for life. But it doesn't matter. I still have nightmares." This is a true story. It happened to my family, and even though it was years ago, Thanksgiving is never the same. I'm sharing it because people need to understand how quickly things can spiral out of control, even in a house full of people. My grandma's house in Ohio was the command center for the holiday. She was one of 9 siblings, so our family get-togethers weren't just gatherings, they were massive crowds. That year, I was 19, home from my first semester of college. The house was packed by noon, with maybe 30 or 40 people. There were cousins I hadn't seen in years, aunts, uncles, new boyfriends and girlfriends, and friends of cousins. The front door was a revolving door, and the noise was incredible. The football game blared in the living room, younger cousins ran wild in the backyard, and the air was thick with the smell of turkey and gravy. It was a perfectly chaotic, normal Thanksgiving. I went inside around 2 o'clock to get a drink. The living room was packed with my uncles yelling at the television. And in the middle of all that chaos, sitting in my grandma's old armchair by the fireplace, was a man I didn't recognize. He was maybe in his 40s, wearing a dark wool pea coat, which was strange because the house was so warm. He just sat there, hands folded in his lap, with a small, polite smile on his face, observing everyone as if he were simply taking it all in. I assumed he was my cousin Komol's new boyfriend or a friend of my uncle Jacob from work. In a family that big, you just assume everyone belongs. I gave him the little nod you offer a stranger at a party. He just smiled back without a word or a nod. His smile wasn't mean, but it wasn't warm either, it was just fixed in place. I shrugged it off and went to the kitchen. Over the next hour, I saw him a few more times. He never moved from that chair. He didn't get food or a drink or speak to anyone. People walked past him, talking and laughing, and he just watched with that same quiet smile. My cousin Mark, who's my age, came up to me. "Dude, who's the guy in the coat?" "I thought he was with Komol," I said. "No, Komol's boyfriend is the tall guy in the kitchen." "I thought he was with Aunt Carol." "Huh, weird. Maybe he's just shy." We both looked over at him. He saw us looking and his smile seemed to get just a tiny bit wider. We felt awkward and went back outside. We were 19-year-old guys, and it wasn't our job to police the party. Finally, around 4 o'clock, my grandma started trying to herd everyone to the dinner table. It was pure chaos, trying to get over 30 people organized, grabbing plates and finding seats, with the kids at the card table. My mom was doing a final head count and she stopped, looking right at the man who was still sitting motionless in the armchair. Being the polite host, my mom walked over to him. "Hi, we're about to eat. Are you joining us?" The man just looked at her and smiled. She paused, confused. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met. Who are you here with?" The chatter in the living room died down as everyone started to look. "I thought he was with you, Karen," my uncle Jacob said to my aunt. "He's not with me," she replied. A ripple went through the room. "He's not with you? I thought he was your friend. Who is he?" The smile on the man's face never changed. My dad, a pretty no-nonsense guy, stepped forward. "Okay, who is this? Who invited this guy?" Total silence fell. Nobody knew him. He was a complete stranger who had walked into our house and been sitting in our living room for at least 2 hours. The mood shifted from confused to scared very fast. "I think you need to leave, man," my dad said, his voice hard. My uncle started to stand up, forming a half circle around him. The man looked at my dad, then at my uncles. His smile finally faded. He stood up slowly. He wasn't a big guy, but there was something profoundly wrong about him. He just looked empty. Without saying a word, he turned, walked calmly to the front door, opened it, and left. For a second, everyone just stood there, stunned. "What the hell was that?" my cousin Mark said. "Go check the doors. Make sure they're locked," my dad ordered. And right in that awful, quiet moment, my Aunt Jen screamed. It wasn't a little scream, it was a raw, horrible sound that cut right through the house. "Where's Eddie?" Has anyone seen Eddie? He was just right here. Eddie. Eddie was her 5-year-old son. The whole house exploded into chaos. Everyone was yelling his name, running to different rooms. We checked the backyard and the basement. I ran out the front door, but the man in the coat was gone and the street was empty. Eddie was gone. We called 911, and the police were there in minutes. Thanksgiving was over. The turkey sat on the table, untouched. The police spent hours interviewing us. What did he look like? What was he wearing? But none of us had a good description. He was just a man, brown hair, a dark coat, and a smile. He was so average, so forgettable. That was what was so terrifying. The next few weeks were a living nightmare. My Aunt Jen and Uncle Rick were like ghosts. We put up missing posters, but the police had no leads. The man had just vanished, and he had taken Eddie with him. We all felt a crushing guilt. He had been right there in the house with us, and we were all so busy and loud that we had just let him be. About a month later, in the middle of December, we got the call. A state trooper in Pennsylvania, 3 states over, had pulled over a car for speeding. The driver was acting very nervous, and the trooper heard a small noise from the trunk. He opened it, and there was Eddie. He was alive. It was the man, the smiling man. The worst part, the part that still makes me sick to my stomach, came out in the police report. They asked him why he took Eddie. It wasn't for ransom or some personal vendetta. He was a human trafficker. He had just walked into our house, seen the chaos, and realized it was the perfect place to grab a kid. The reason they found him a month later, the police said, was that they asked Eddie what had happened. My little 5-year-old cousin, who was thankfully too young to really understand it all, told them. He said the man was angry because he kept trying to sell him, but in Eddie's words, nobody was giving good money. That man had been driving around for a month, going from place to place, trying to get a good price for my cousin. He was caught because he was getting impatient. Eddie is 15 now. He doesn't remember any of it, thank God. But we do. We don't have big Thanksgivings anymore. And I, to this day, will never assume a strange face in a crowd belongs there. On the Thanksgiving I turned 17, my parents sent me to spend the holiday weekend with my aunt and uncle. They lived in one of those tiny, quiet towns in the middle of nowhere, where the profound silence was almost deafening to a city kid like me. My aunt put me in the second-floor guest room, whose best feature was a large window overlooking the backyard. Beyond their yard stretched a huge, flat field of tall, dead brown grass, and way on the other side, a few hundred yards away, stood another house. It was an old, simple white 2-story farmhouse. The first day was boring. I mostly read or played games on my phone. On Wednesday night, the night before Thanksgiving, I couldn't sleep. It was after midnight, and the house was utterly silent. I got up and went to the window, looking out into the dark. The moon was bright, illuminating the field clearly. That's when I noticed the house across the way had lights on. It wasn't the bright glow of electric light, but a soft, flickering radiance. I squinted, trying to see better. The light was coming from a big first-floor window, what looked like a dining room. As my eyes adjusted, I saw more detail. The light was definitely from candles, several of them on a long table set for a big dinner. I could see plates and glasses glinting. It looked like a huge holiday feast. And there were people inside. I couldn't make out their faces from that distance, but I could clearly see their silhouettes moving against the candlelight. It looked like a family, a man, a woman, and at least one smaller child. They were moving around, sitting down, perhaps passing food. It just looked like a normal, if old-fashioned, family dinner. I thought it was a little weird to be having a full Thanksgiving dinner with candles at 1 in the morning, but I figured maybe they were celebrating early. I watched for another minute, then got tired, closed the curtains, and went back to bed. The next morning was Thanksgiving. I woke to the smell of turkey cooking and went down to the kitchen where my aunt was busy. "So, who lives in that house across the field?" I asked, making conversation. "They had a pretty late Thanksgiving dinner last night." My aunt stopped basting the turkey. She turned and looked at me, her expression completely blank. "What house?" she said. "The white one," I said, pointing out the kitchen window. "I saw them. It looked like a full Thanksgiving spread, candles and everything." My aunt put the baster down. Her face went pale. "David," she said, "there's no one in that house. No one has lived there for years." I laughed, thinking she was joking. "What are you talking about?" "I saw them. A whole family. They were right there in the dining room." "No," she said, walking over to the window to stare out. "That's the old Harrison place. It burned down 2 years ago. Tonight is the anniversary." Now I was the one who felt cold. "What do you mean, anniversary? It looked fine to me last night. It was all lit up." "David, that's what's so horrible," she whispered. "The fire happened 2 years ago on Thanksgiving night. A horrible fire started in the kitchen. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison and their little girl, Sarah, I think her name was. She was only 9. They all died. They found them in the dining room. The investigators said it looked like they had just sat down for their Thanksgiving dinner when the smoke got them." I didn't believe her. I couldn't. What I had seen was too clear. "I'll show you," she said, grabbing her keys and pulling on a jacket. "You need to see it in the daylight." We got in her car and drove the long way around on the main road on Thanksgiving morning. We pulled up a dirt driveway overgrown with weeds. What I saw made my stomach drop. The house was a ruin, a burnt-out shell. The white paint I thought I'd seen was just patches that hadn't been completely blackened by the fire. The roof was gone on one side, and the windows were all shattered or boarded up with charred planks of wood. My aunt must have seen the look on my face. "Let's go look at the dining room," she said very softly. We walked around the side to the big window I had been watching. The glass was gone. I looked inside. The room was destroyed, everything covered in a thick layer of black soot and ash. The ceiling above had collapsed, leaving it open to the sky. And right in the middle of the room was the ghost of a dining table, a melted, blackened lump of wood with the twisted metal frames of chairs fallen around it. I just stood there staring. This was the room. This was where I had seen the candles. This was where I had seen the family moving, sitting down to eat their feast. I felt like I was going to be sick. It wasn't a prank or a mistake. I saw what I saw. That afternoon, I had to sit through a huge Thanksgiving dinner with my aunt, uncle, and cousins who came over. I just pushed food around on my plate. I kept picturing that other table, the burnt-out one, across the field. I didn't sleep in that guest room again. I moved to the couch in the living room on the other side of the house. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation, a reflection, a dream, something. But I know I was awake, and I know what I saw. They were just trying to finish their Thanksgiving.